winter solstice, and thought I would discuss donations today, as no one is in a charitable mood in the news. But yeah, I thought I'd talk about the Tory donors fleeing the Conservative Party. But I first of all want to come up something else. So, first of all, let me just stick up a bit of a headline, and this is the weirdest one. So, former Conservative donor to pump further £5 million. Now, £5 million is a lot. I will just point out to a lot for anyone to donate to any political party. Like, even the Conservative Party are not in the habit of getting donations of £5 million. It happens sometimes, but not very often. Whereas this is a former Conservative donor. It says to pump further £5 million into Lawrence Fox's Reclaim Party, which is really weird. But it also sort of raises a bit of a question. So, a little bit of history. So, when the Conservatives last lost power and lost a lot of seats, so 1997, and at the next election, they basically won one extra seat. There was no real rebuilding happening for some years. And this was a Conservative Party that wasn't completely dead and buried. This is not like the Conservative Party now, where they've completely lost their way. The Conservative Party in 1997, they'd come to the end of a long run. They'd run out of road. They basically sold the family silver. I'm surprised they didn't sell the crown jewels. There's basically very little left. And they'd run out of... Because that's how they got through those... what was it, 17 years? About 17 years, 18 years maybe. That's how they got through them all. They basically kept selling things off and then using the money to make some people richer, so they kept voting for them. But they ran out of... But looters, they're basically looters. They ran out of things to loot. But the party was a normal political party, understood political strategy, understood politics. And the reason they say now, we weren't saying this at the time, but the reason that, looking back on it, the senior Conservatives of the time, the main reason why they say they were lost at sea in those first few years of opposition was because they couldn't get enough money to basically to pay for strategists, data analysts, people who could poll the public and tell them exactly what they were thinking. They were without all of this. And the reason they were without that is because they weren't getting donations. They weren't getting such strong donations. Because remember, the difference between Labour not getting much in the way of donations and getting a lot of donations, as they were this year, is not a huge amount, because Labour get a lot of funding from small individual amounts from members like myself, and then they also obviously get money from unions, affiliated unions, and they will also then get some, at any point, even when they're a bit down and out, they'll get some donations from wealthy backers. Whereas the Conservatives, a lot of people who donate to I'm not saying there are some people who will just donate to the Conservatives because they're Conservatives, right? But there are also a lot of people who donate to the Conservative Party because the Conservative Party throws them public contracts back in their face, which they gather up very, happily. And that's not going to happen. So the Tories in opposition lose out on those big donations from people who want something in return because they can't give them anything in return. But if you've now also got, someone who's going to give £5 million to Lawrence Fox is not going to give... They don't care about anyone winning. If someone donates to Reform UK, you're not donating to the next government. You're not possibly getting that in return. But if you're donating to the Reclaim Party, which wins absolutely nothing. I don't even think, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't even think they've won any council seats. I actually don't think they've won anything, literally anything. And, so this donor who's willing to throw £5 million, they are the type of donor who would have given it to the Conservatives even when they're down and out, because they're obviously not looking for a direct financial return if they're willing to give it to Lawrence Fox. So the Conservatives, it seems to me, are in even worse position than they were in 1997 onwards, because apart from the fact they've now got complete chumps in charge who just don't seem to understand enough about politics, they're also very likely losing those sorts of donations that 20 years ago they would have got, but now they're not getting. And you know, you sort of think they're going to be down and out for a bit. But I'll tell you what's also quite interesting here, because so we obviously know a lot of those sort of donations are probably going to go to Reform UK, because again, you're not going to get a massive return on it. But even if Reform UK can't form a government, at least in the near future, I don't rule out the possibility in the long-term future. I think someone early on, before we went live, was, in fact, there we go. Situation similar to the Canada Conservative Party in 1993. The Reform Party became the prominent right-wing party and won power in 2006. So I don't rule out, I mean, you know, that's the 13-year period, right? I don't rule out the same thing happening. A lot of people were talking about Canada in the early to mid-90s ahead of this election. All year, people, you know, statisticians have been talking about Canada, and that this election, the Tories were trying to make it like that this would be like the 1992 election, where out of nowhere they won. But it was never true. It wasn't out of nowhere. The Conservatives were actually polling like they were going to win. I don't know where this idea comes from. There was a feeling that Labour could win it, but it was always considered tight in 1992. It wasn't this massive shock when the Conservatives won. It was just people sort of thought Labour might win. And a lot of statisticians were saying, no, if you want to look at a similar year, you want to look at Canada 93. And so it could happen, but it's not going to happen straight away. But I'll tell you what is a bit interesting. So Reclaim have at times had a bit of a pact with Reform UK. The London mayoral elections, for example, I think, or sort of with some local elections as well, I think they were sort of standing aside for one another. They had a bit of a pact going on. But there's a bit of a weird timeline I've been looking up here, because Lawrence Fox has been discussing Nigel Farage last night. I only saw it today. A bit of a weird bromance timeline. So let's have a look at this. So, April 2021, Nigel Farage backs Lawrence Fox in London mayoral race. Right? So, you know, they're nice and friendly. November 2023. So, October, actually, let me just take you back. I haven't put it on here, but in October 2023, if you remember, that's when Lawrence Fox was sacked from GB News. Do you remember that? And Nigel Farage had basically said Lawrence Fox deserved it. So then a month later, Lawrence Fox claims he's been debanked by Nigel Farage on the basis of, because remember all the sort of Coops business? So he's claiming that he's like struggling to get, he's constantly being asked about what he calls legitimate transactions by his bank because of the suspicion around Nigel Farage, which will be nonsense, by the way. If he's being questioned about legitimate transactions, it's because the bank isn't convinced they're legitimate, right? It doesn't mean to say they're not, but you know. Then earlier this year, it's back the other way. This is what Lawrence Fox wrote about Nigel Farage. He said, and I quote, "I was keen to write to you," so he's writing to Reclaim members, or at least those on the newsletter. I don't know if they have members either. "I was keen to write to you and say I believe Reclaim's interests are being unequivocally furthered by Nigel in this election. As a result, I am delighted to tell you I am an enthusiastic voter for reform on Thursday." And then yesterday, so December 2024, so Nigel Farage is spreading, I've done a video earlier on this, he's spreading his disinformation about the Christmas market attacker. And Lawrence Fox sort of tweets him saying, "Your chairman is a follower of the death cult." Which, I mean, I imagine it's intended to be Islamophobic, that statement, because the chair of Reform UK, Zia Yusuf, is a Muslim. But yeah, I mean, he's a bit all over the place, is old Lawrence Fox. He's a bit all over the place. He's a bit unstable. He actually needs help. I've said before, he's having he's having the worst midlife crisis ever, and he's having it in full public view. And yet, this fairly unstable chap is... I've lost it again. Oh no, I'm getting... He is getting 5 million quid from a former Conservative donor. So, like, how bad do the Conservatives have to be? I mean, how bad are they? What a terrible position they are in. That they are losing and that's a massive... I keep on to emphasise it in case there's any Americans watching it, because you're thinking, like, 5 million? What? That's nothing, is it? Yeah, in American politics, you wouldn't wipe your arse with £5 million, which would be about $7 or $8 million. But in this country, a £5 million donation from a single donor for any political party is massive. You rarely get that. In fact, Rishi Sunak increased the amount, because we have strict limits in the UK on what you're allowed to spend at elections. So it's not good enough, our rules, but we do have laws that try to limit the influence of money in politics. It doesn't go nearly far enough, but it's better than nothing. So there are limits, and Rishi Sunak raised those limits for political parties, but not third parties, ahead of the election. He basically doubled them. Now, they justified it on the basis that, it hadn't been raised since like 2010, so we're just raising it with inflation, which is fine. That's fair enough. It's just that he didn't do it for third party, like non-partisan groups. So that was a bit of a fiddle. But the reason he did that is because he thought he was going to be raking it in, because the Conservatives had just been given a £10 million, is a bequeathment really rather than a donation. Someone had died and left £10 million to the Conservative Party in their will. So the Conservative Party, the quid's in. Just a single £10 million donation. It's like, wow, the coffers are full. The thing is, though, after that, they didn't really get very much at all. And during the election campaign, the Conservative Party were getting very little money. At certain points, they stopped their social media advertising during the actual election campaign itself because they were running low on funds. So, they kept for several days stopping their social media ads, whereas Labour were like raking it in. So the Conservatives actually helped Labour there. But, so the point I'm trying to make is £5 million is a massive... Kemi Badenoch would bite your hand off for 5 million quid from a single donor. So it looks like the Conservatives are going to really struggle if some of their madder, more generous donors are actually pissing it away with, like, Lawrence Fox. Anyway, M saying that I'm going to paraphrase Dickens again and say it's too bad Kemi Badenoch's increasing the surplus amount of stupidity in the House of Commons. Well, she's not alone. She's not alone. MPs, I mean, I have a very dim view of most MPs, if I'm honest. Of any party, I don't care about the party. I mean, I've said before, my biggest realisation, I suppose, epiphany, if you like, in politics, from being interested from a very young age, was when I realised that actually most MPs, because I assumed that MPs must be like, they must all be good at politics because they've become MPs, right? And it was a bit of a realisation to me when I actually realised, no, most of them are really thick. Or even if they're not thick, they're not good at politics. Like, there's plenty of bright ones. They're clever, but they're not good at politics. They're not wise, shall we say. Intelligent, but not wise. And some of them are both thick and unwise. But, there it goes. Film they're saying, I love how Canada's become a reference point for British elections. Canadians must like that they're getting noticed by us. I don't know, in all honesty. I suppose it depends on the Canadians. But it is. It's Reform UK are a serious risk for the future because, think about Reform UK are populists. It's really that simple. They're a populist party. When do populists succeed? Because most people, like the average voter doesn't want... You talk about reforms, but the average voter doesn't really want reforms. Politicians sometimes use the word radical. Most voters don't really like the sound of that because it's different. And like if you change something, there's probably winners and losers. If you change things a lot, then the winners can win big, but the losers can lose big. So a lot of people who are risk averse, I mean, you think about it yourself, think about people you know, it might even be yourself. A lot of people are very risk averse. So the same is true in elections. The reason why a lot of people voted for Brexit is because you asked them, you actually asked them, and you say, well, how do you know it's going to lead to all these great things that they're promising? You're actually putting your trust in politicians. And the answer you got back was invariably something like, well, it won't probably make that much difference at all. Like, they overplayed the benefits, but even when they accepted that they couldn't be certain they would get the benefits, they didn't think it. The doom and gloom that us Remainers were trying to explain to them, they didn't think that would happen. Not because they thought we were lying. Some of them did, but not because they thought but just because they thought, well, no government would allow that. They just thought that the government, if would not allow a terrible consequence, and they would pull the plug on the project if it looked like the terrible things were going to happen. But that's not what happened. So a lot of people are very risk averse. So they don't want governments that change things madly unless they feel they've got no choice. So people like Nigel Farage and Trump appeal to people who think that the established politics have failed. They've gone from one to the other. In America, you swing from Democrats to Republicans. And there are people in America who lose every single time. Doesn't matter whether you've got the Democrats in control, the Republicans in control. They lose every time. They know they're getting screwed over. That's what led to Trump. In this country, you have people who lose, whether it's Labour or the Conservatives, and those people will be attracted to Farage. Farage didn't exist as a political choice 10, 20 years ago. But now he does. They have that. If you think about it, 20 years ago, people had the choice. You had Conservatives, you had Labour. For an individual constituency, there were a few other parties as well. You might have had the Lib Dems, the SNP, Plaid, the Green Party from 2010. But for a national government, it was Labour or the Conservatives, and people still sort of feel that now. But but now, they're looking at Reform UK, and Reform UK are trying to convince people that they can actually win the election, not that they can build and win in say 10 years. No, they're saying they can win at the very next election. They're really trying to gather a lot of, and the reason they're doing that is because the Conservatives are down and out, they're gone, and they're not going to start making smarter decisions because they're not getting the donations to be able to pay data analysts to say, yeah, you're getting this line completely wrong. So the Conservatives at the moment, as far as we can tell, the Conservative Party at the moment is getting all of its polling advice from the Daily Telegraph or something. It's doing what I'm doing. It's reliant on, I'm sure they've got enough money to pay for the odd poll themselves, internal polling. But they haven't got the money to pay for the people who can really properly analyse it and design. Because the thing is, it takes a skill to actually design a good survey that really gets to what you want to know as well. That's not an easy task. You need experts for that. So they haven't got that. And at the same time, right now, Labour are also unpopular. Some of it's because they weren't able to wave the magic wand and make everything magically better overnight. But they never promised to. But, that was always going to lose some. But some of it's unnecessary. Some of it is because of a series of policies that they didn't have to make. They're all justifiable. The winter fuel allowance, the inheritance tax on farms, the bus fare thing. You can justify all of them. But they were politically unwise. And so you've got a load of people who are not thinking, let's just give Labour more time. I mean, they will, because they've got no choice. They'll have to wait till the next election. But so right now, Reform are looking to harvest as much support as possible. So for the future, yeah, because you look at the future, and at some point, people are going to be dissatisfied with Labour, whether fairly or not. Doesn't matter. Labour could do everything they're promising to do. Their decade of renewal could be a genuine decade of renewal. But what happens after it? What do they do after it? And when Labour start to lose favour, which they will, they absolutely will the Conservatives have built themselves up? Because if not, if these donors aren't donating to them and they don't sort themselves out, it'll be Reform UK waiting in the wings. So they are a serious threat. Just not yet. They're not going to win the next election. but they are a worry for the future. Luke saying their only concern is the proposals to merge councils into larger unitary authorities. Given that the UK has some of the largest local government units in the world, what impact do you think? So it's very difficult for me to know because I'm not. I show a casual interest at most at local government because my own personal experience of local government is more cynical than it is of national government. But we do, like, local government doesn't work. I was saying I did a stream with Graham on, and I will discuss this in a separate video as well, on Labour's devolution plans, hopefully before Christmas. But I was saying with Graham, like, here's my... The thing with devolution is it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it is better to have a lot of decisions on local issues made locally. People in London don't need to know about that, and they don't know enough about it. Let local authorities deal with it. Where the problem is, we don't really have local authorities. Like councils, for those who are outside of the UK and don't really know, our councils are amateur, literally amateur. They're not paid. We don't have paid people running our regional legislative bodies. They're like volunteers, basically. You win an election, you get an allowance, but it's not pay, it's not a salary. So, if you think about a councillor, who are these councillors? Some of them have jobs. They have to have jobs to bring the money in. So they can only spend so much time being a councillor. And a lot of that time is spent dealing with the problems of their constituents, basically, the people in their ward. So that doesn't leave a lot of time to become an expert in the various decisions that council needs to make. Second type of councillor is an entrepreneur, like a business owner whose business largely runs itself, so it gives them lots of free time. So they're making plenty of money. They don't need to spend a lot of time making that money because their business, they've got a decent manager, they've got staff who will run that business for them. They just have to keep a weather eye on it. That gives them lots of time. And sure, they have got lots of time then to become professional politicians, but some of them will be good. I'm not knocking all of them, but I've seen plenty of them. They become councillors for their own interests. They become councillors, and this is not of one particular, don't think I'm just talking about Conservative councillors here. They become councillors to basically give public contracts to their own business interests. That's what happens. Then you've got your third type of councillor who's a retired councillor. They've been in the world of work, now they're retired. And that's fine. So they've got the time to do it now. They don't have to worry too much about the money. They're retired, they're on a pension, and they've got the time also. And they're not necessarily got business interests to corruptly pursue. But what it means is, in terms of those councillors, you've got a lot of retired people who are councillors who have a particular point of view. It's not very varied, it's not very diverse. So that's the problem we have. Whereas where Labour's devolution plans will make the most good is where metro mayors are taking control, because they're professional. They're paid properly, they're paid a very good wage. They have staff, so metro mayors, their whole unit, their whole operation is properly funded. So they will be the ones who really make devolution work in England. But not the metro mayors don't cover all of England. So between the cracks, you're not going to get as much benefit because you do not have professional politicians using those powers. So you can't give them full powers because I think the term that was used in Yes Minister was clowns, which, and in no disrespect to councillors, but you don't have the money. They don't have the staff. I mean, they don't, like an MP has a good salary themselves, so they can, and they should be full-time. Not all of them are. Nigel Farage famously is not, but they should be full-time, and many are full-time, and they can dedicate their full-time to getting into the detail of policies and projects. They can employ staff, and you've got a wider support mechanism as well, which doesn't really exist for councils. So you end up with things like the Marble Arch Mound with councils. That's how they spend the money. But anyway, that's just a little aside. I will discuss it more later. Film really saying, I think Labour, Greens and Lib Dems need to keep reminding voters that Reform supported Brexit and still do, considering voter opinions have changed. Don't think this gets talked about enough. Well, so, I mean, the Lib Dems do anyway. Being realistic about electoral strategy here. So if we go through those one at a time. So Labour are trying to dial down the rhetoric on Brexit altogether. You know, they are trying to get a closer relationship with the EU, but they don't want to make a big fuss about it because they don't want to stoke those divisions again. So Labour are unlikely to keep tackling Reform UK over their Brexit stance. The Green Party are more likely to be able to do that. Even though they've had an influx of Lexiteers, I think the Green Party are still very vocally anti-Brexit, so they absolutely can. But the Green Party are as much, in fact, they are more in competition with Labour than the Conservatives. And they're not particularly ranged against Reform UK. Ideologically, sure, they're like the opposite of Reform UK in many ways. But in terms of electoral strategy, Reform UK are not a problem for the Green Party. Reform UK have harvested very few votes from the Greens, although they have harvested some. But their policy areas do not really overlap. So, yeah, the Green Party, in terms of like turning voters off other parties, are more interested in turning voters away from the Conservatives, the Lib Dems and Labour. And as for the Lib Dems themselves, again, their main opposition is the Conservatives. So, although all of those parties do not like Reform UK, electorally speaking, Reform UK are not their major challenge. It's always someone else that is a bigger challenge for them. Do I think there should be a large-scale consolidation merger of local government, given as above the British are particularly well known for doing that over a long period of time? So I would like myself a massive shake-up of local government, but I don't see it happening because, again, I refer you to my earlier point, people don't like radical change. Like, sometimes politicians will talk about it, but a lot of voters don't really like it. They'd prefer it if you just kept changing something a little bit. That way, if it goes, because, I mean, partly because no one's, and I haven't, to be honest, no one's really got confidence that a politician with a big project it'll go right. So it's like, so you always have at the back of your mind, what if this idea of yours goes wrong? So if you change something a little bit, if it goes wrong, it doesn't go hideously wrong. It just goes a little bit wrong, right? So yeah, it's you have to change it a bit at a time. I think you have to change it a bit at a time. The changes they're talking about are fairly hefty as it is, but I mean, the problem I've always said is, in the UK, we are a federal nation. We're quite clearly a federal nation. We're made of multiple individual nations. But we do not have a very good federal infrastructure, like, for example, Germany does. We'd be much better off with a system. I'm not saying that would be... But that sort of federalisation would suit us better. But we really don't have it. Oh, John, they're saying Anderson, Liverpool, case in point about, dodgy councillors, I imagine you mean. At least this Christmas is Tory free. No Sunak telling us everything's great, but Trump coming is scaring me. Well, lots of things are scaring me, but I always used to annoy my now wife. Was at the time not, because she say, "Oh, what?" Because she says I'm impossible to buy for, and I probably am. And so everybody, oh, what do you want? What do you want for Christmas? And I would keep saying a Labour government, and she kept saying, yeah, I might not be able to arrange that. So, this year it's all fine. I got a Labour government. So maybe I should just change it now. I'd feel a bit of an ingrate if I did. But maybe I should change it to a Labour government that isn't quite so cavalier with votes. Because, my big beef with Labour at the moment is they've done... I wouldn't mind if, like, for example, if you take the employer's national insurance hike, that has obviously come with a cost. That has come with a short-term cost, which there's no point in downplaying. But they will argue that's going to come good in a few years' time. So that's the sort of thing I go, okay. I'd still think to myself, like I'm daily thinking to myself, wouldn't it have been better to have just said, because we wouldn't have had to put up the employers' national insurance if we'd have put up employees' national insurance just to the point where they were at the start of the year. So I keep thinking to myself, wouldn't it have been better for Labour? And I don't know the answer, by the way, but wouldn't it have been better for Labour to have just said, we're going to put national insurance back up to where it was at the start of 2024, but we will not put it up any higher. That would have raised the same amount of money. Actually, it might have raised a little bit more. And it wouldn't have caused a loss in business confidence. And people would have accepted it, because you think, well, that's screwing over the workers, isn't it? So it's not really, because what the workers were wanting at the point at which the Tories were cutting those taxes, they didn't want the tax cuts. They wanted the investment in public services. So I do keep thinking, were Labour sure about this? Was this based on like sound polling, which it might have been? I hope it was. Or were they just being too cautious? But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's done. But that could come good. Whereas the winter fuel allowance, I don't see how that comes good. Because even if in 4 years' time, Labour can prove to these pensioners that they're better off under Labour, there'll still be pensioners going, yeah, but you could have done that and still give me the 200 quid. The bus fare, same thing. You could say to people, well, you know, your income's now much higher than it was in real terms. And they could say, yeah, but I still could have had a bus ride for a quid less. And, you know, and the inheritance tax on farms, I mean, that's just like, they could have made, you know, they didn't make any money out of that. They made no money out of that. But anyway. Well, I'm Peg, saying I did a reaction vid to Starmer's meeting with Jonas Støre of Norway about a green energy deal. Was very disappointed it was about carbon capture, not a real green energy deal. Yeah. But jobs is jobs. This is what I keep saying. So, I mean, the carbon capture thing, I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's not completely useless. It just has very, very niche use. But the main purpose for it, what Labour have to do to, and they've said this, it's not me reading into it, they've said this explicitly. You know, the difference, so Labour are winding down an industry. They're trying to wind down the fossil fuel industry. Thatcher wound down industries in the 80s. Now, so some of them were stupid, you know, winding down the computer industry in this country. That was not a clever move. But coal was on its way out. Do you know what? It was on its way out. So there were some industries that had to be wound down. Where she went wrong is in not stimulating the economies that were going to lose out. So she didn't replace the jobs. She just allowed entire communities' economies to collapse. In particular in places like where I grew up. So what Labour are doing, and they're very open about it, is they need to transition the jobs. They need to move the jobs from the industries that they want to wind down to the emerging industries. And so some of these projects, their big benefit is just job creation. It's just move people to decent jobs because carbon capture isn't like a harmful industry. It's just, it's useful for like the cement, and we're always going to need cement. So it's useful for the cement industry. So it is helpful. It's just it's not a magic bullet for like carbon, excessive carbon being pumped into the atmosphere. So regional assemblies was a missed opportunity, but that ship sailed since the referendum in the early 2000s. Well, this was the problem. Like, you know, Labour, like Blair and Brown were both quite keen on devolution in England. And it just turned out people didn't want it. Now, whether you argue that that's because it wasn't presented in quite the right way or whatever, just people didn't want it. People didn't want it. They just didn't want it. They say, if it's any consolation, I think men in general aren't that easy to buy presents for. Do you know what? I did see, because you always see articles at this time of year, and I did see some good advice in a newspaper. I can't remember which one. And it was from a fella who was saying, look, you know, this is what you do, right? So observe the bloke in question with, like, find something that they use, some tool, some implement, something that they use on a regular basis, and it's probably just a basic, just get a posher version of it. So you know that they use it, get a deluxe version of it or an upmarket version of it. So that's actually quite good advice. The problem with me is that when I get an implement, I tend to get the good one in the first place. So yeah, because I think this, they gave an example of a potato masher that they'd been using for years, or they got as a present that they'd been using it for years because they thought it was brilliant. Whereas for me, if I was to buy a potato masher, I would just buy a good one in the first place. So it doesn't work for me, but never mind. But at the same time, I also don't mind what I get as a. My wife just stresses over it all the time. I just say, do you know what? I'll just be happy with a bit of cheese. I'll just be happy with a bit of cheese. That's all I need. So I don't know what she's got me. But anyway, we need to stop Musk interfering too. Yeah, we do need to do that. Rather more quickly. This was a problem. So we had a little flurry of articles over the last few days talking about various ideas that Labour are thinking of, none of which go far enough in my view. I mean, I would be really clear about it. I would just say, because there's like various ideas. So, for example, like Elon Musk technically cannot legally give $100 million, which is about 80 million quid, to Reform UK. Because even if he puts it through his British firms, he's just money laundering if he does it. Because those British firms don't make enough profit for that. It's way beyond their profits. They make a few million quid profit in this country. They're not hugely lucrative. So, yeah, they can't really... but if I were Labour, I mean, I would... So what they're talking about is rules to make sure that a British-based company cannot possibly give more money in donations than it makes in profit. But that's just a way of making it harder to money launder. It doesn't stop it altogether. I would be much firmer. And I would say... If a company, I mean, I don't like the idea of companies donating, but you can't just ban a business from donating because then you would have to say, well, then unions shouldn't donate either, should they? And, Labour, that would obviously tear Labour apart, so they're not going to do that. So I would say, okay, businesses can donate, but only if they're British businesses, not British-based, British businesses. They have to be owned by someone. The business has to be registered in the UK fully for tax purposes. And if it's an international company, its international headquarters has to be based in Britain or the UK. And the majority shareholders, the majority control has to also be based in the UK for tax purposes. So you cannot, for example, have a business that is foreign owned or even owned by someone who is a tax exile. So I would just cut it out. Just say, we're not having any foreign donations. That includes foreign companies that just happen to have some outlets in Britain. Vouchers are always nice to have. Well, it depends where they are. Unfortunately, these days, if you want to get someone vouchers, the one that makes the most sense is Amazon. But then you just have to make sure that person doesn't... Because you can easily have a problem with Amazon as a company, can't you? They're not the most progressive company in the world. So, but you get other vouchers and it's really hard to spend them. It's like my sister got us some vouchers for our wedding. This is months ago. We've just found something we can get from a place that takes these vouchers. But I suppose if you know a place where the person in question, but I always find vouchers a bit impersonal as well. I don't like getting them for people. I like to get them a thing. But anyway. And they're saying the two men I mainly buy for I don't see often enough to observe the things they use on a regular basis. Well, that's a problem. Well, you just get a bottle of wine or something. That's easy. So Kent County Council going would be popular, would it? I don't know much about Kent County Council. But I mean, it would be replaced with something, and it may be replaced by something that is it's got the same people being elected to staff it anyway. So, anyway. Link the maximum donations to the amount of tax they pay. See, and again, because there are some very large international companies in this country that will pay what sounds like a lot of tax, and they would still like a right-wing government that will give them tax breaks. And I honestly, I wouldn't link it to profits at all. I would say, I would actually reward. I would say you can only do it if you're British, if you're a British company and not a tax dodger. So automatically exclude any company that's not British owned, which actually gets rid of most of the big ones. But also, you know, if you have your finances offshore for tax purposes, you can't donate either. We don't have tax dodgers donating to political. You can donate to like political causes, maybe, as long as you're British based. You could do that, but not to political parties. Get rid of it all. Anyway, Scottish independence supporters telling me that the English need to be independent as well. What a great way to push England further right towards fascism. Well, I mean, the thing is, like, we don't have a government. There is no English government. So when you've got England only matters, and this is one of the things that causes unnecessary schisms in the UK. This is what I mean about not having a federal infrastructure. So who manages? So healthcare's devolved, right? So who manages healthcare in England? Well, that's the Westminster government. Who manages policing in England? Well, that's the Westminster government. Education, Westminster government. So it's natural to, if you're in Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland, of course you see the Westminster government as an English government, because first of all, it's going to be mostly occupied by English people because most people in the UK live in England. But also, like, they also, you know, when the government, supposed to be the UK government, announces something to do with the NHS, what they mean is NHS England. They don't mean the NHS. They just mean NHS England, because the Scottish government deals with NHS Scotland and the Welsh government with NHS Wales. Slightly different in Northern Ireland, but nonetheless that's devolved as well. So yeah, we should have, and I don't mean we should have an English government either, because England's massive. I mean, you could, but I would say England's diverse enough that you should have multiple governments. You should, at the very least, like, London's largely got its own government anyway, so leave it alone. Just increase the amount of devolution for London, but they're already fairly well devolved anyway. But, you know, you could have a south of England, a Midlands, and a north of England government. Do that. But would people want that? I suspect not. But that's what we should have. Andrew saying, down here it's seen that having the same people, councillors, running a devolved assembly, we really need a big step up in talent to re-engage the ratepayers. Yeah, and the way you get that step up in talent is it's going to need money. It's money we haven't got. That's the problem, isn't it? So what you really want is, you want councillors, and maybe you don't have as many councillors. Maybe you don't need as many councillors if they're paid. And, you know, maybe they're paid, you know, you don't get paid as much as an MP. Maybe they're paid £50,000 a year, which is still plenty. That's plenty for most people to live on, you know, as well as a few expenses. You still get your expenses like an MP. But you imagine that, you know, the how much that would, I've not even worked it out, but I mean, that would cost a lot. And let me just do a quick thing, because it's like 17. Now you do get a, let me just have a quick look here. What I'm talking about here, because so assuming everything else cost the same and you just had to stump up a salary for all of these councillors, actually it's not as much as I thought it was. No, they could do this. I thought it'd be a lot more. It's so it's coming out at £850 million. So we've got about 17,000 councillors. If they were paid a salary of £50,000, do you know, I thought it'd be a lot more than this. Yeah, this is less than £1 billion. You could do this. No, we should do this. I've changed my mind completely. I don't know why I've never bothered working it out before. I mean, it would actually in reality cost more than that because you also want to pay for a more professional civil service. I mean, we have, council civil servants, of course, but you could pay for a more effective one as well. Pay more money to senior civil servants working for the council and staff and things like that. But I would do that. You would do that. Make it pay. Bring back the separate Saxon kingdoms before England was formed. Isn't that when Wales was like that would mess it up? Because in fact, you'd have to have separate governments then, because I think Wales was right across England. So you had a bit of England underneath Wales. I don't think it was called England then, but you had a bit of area underneath Wales, and then you had a bit above it, and then above that you had Scotland. So that would naturally divide it all up. It would mean, would I be in Wales then? I can't remember how far north it came. Let me try and see if I can find the map. It's going to be really hard to find. I can't, yeah. All right. This is not one to find really quickly. If we get a multi-Britain government, North, Mid, South, could we see the North and Midlands return to the EU and the South being stubborn president? Well, no, we'd still be part of the UK. But for local issues, for devolved issues, we could hopefully be in a better place. It says it shouldn't cost much more civil service wise as long as there was some centralisation of civil service as well as devolved decision making. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why I never just really thought about the maths of it before. I thought it would just be hideously expensive. That's not really expensive at all, is it? We can afford to do that. Professionalise local councils, because £50,000. I think that's fine. I think you could do it for 50,000. And I know there'll be people in the south of England who go, well, you £50,000 a year might be like riches to a northern monkey like you, but down south it doesn't stretch as far. But given that councillors currently don't get paid anything in the south of England, surely that would increase it a bit. And actually, given that that's really low, I mean, you could bring it up to 60,000 for all I care. That wouldn't cost that much more. I think we could afford to do that, and I think that would actually come up with. I think that would be money well spent. I think that would be money well spent. You could also make councils proportional representation then as well, because as I say, you don't need to pay someone 50, 60 grand a year just to manage like the size of a ward. A ward's not very big really, but you could. So you could even reduce the number of councillors a bit, or keep the number of councillors the same, but have larger wards for your additional members. So have like councillors of those wards, and then a pool of councillors who are chosen via proportional representation. Have transferable vote for the ward councillors, the constituency councillors. Oh, I can see this working. I would do this. Certainly believe police forces should be merged. Very inefficient in the current setup. Yeah, I don't know why we have so many police forces. I don't know why at all. But there we go. Viv, they're saying 50 grand. I'd be up for it. Yeah, well, a lot of people would. I think that. Yeah. I don't know why we're not talking about that more. I'm gonna start pushing that a bit more. Not that it'll make any difference. No one listens to me. They say Westminster MPs make more from expenses than salary. No, they don't. Their expenses are more than their salary, but that's because it's going on staff. They're not actually on the. We know there are some MPs who take the piss a bit with their expenses, but mostly the expenses are they're not being spent on the MP. It's covering their staff, which isn't money in their pocket. Admittedly, yes, you get the odd MP who employs their like significant other, or like Nadine Dorries used to employ her daughters, for example. What's that tosser who lost his seat in the Southwest? The former veteran. Do you know what? I'm so pleased he's gone. I've forgotten his name already. I can picture him, but I can't. I'm really bad at names and faces anyway. Like I can picture his face. Johnny Mercer, wasn't it? Johnny Mercer employed his wife on, pretty high salary. So you get nepotism going on, but by and large, so that's a bit dodgy. But the expenses, by and large, for vast majority of MPs, are actually being spent on office, office rent, staff, bills, things like that. The second home, I mean, you need a second home. If you're an MP that lives in like Scotland or something, you can't expect them to like kip on a park bench in Hyde Park when they're up at Westminster. So obviously you need expenses for a second home as well. Yes, we know some MPs take the piss, but most don't. So that the expenses are fine. And also, if you're a councillor, you don't need the second home expenses. You only need like necessary travel, maybe. You wouldn't even need an office because I would build a count. I would build a build. You would. Well, you have buildings anyway, but you'd have a building for count where every councillor gets their office in it, publicly funded, so they don't have to pay anything. It'll come out of obviously funds. It'll come out of public funds, but it doesn't like go through the councillor. So the council doesn't need that many expenses because they don't have to do a lot of travelling. There's some travel around the constituency and maybe meeting up with other councillors on fact-finding missions. Things like that are fine. Interview be like, what do I think of nepotism? Well, darling, well, yeah. But that is the case with some MPs, but it's like, it's a small minority. M saying, I think a lot of people listen to you, Phil. Well, when I say no one, I mean of policymakers, people who can decide these things. Policymakers don't even know YouTube exists. This is one of my like little beefs, isn't it? You look at YouTube channels for everyone. They're all crap. Everyone. I've looked at YouTube. I mean, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, like, you could look at the I'm going to go on another rant, sorry. You can look at the Labour Party YouTube channel. You could sort of think to yourself, well, it was set up years and years ago. Maybe Keir Starmer isn't a fan of YouTube. I think he's wrong, but, maybe. But he set up his own YouTube channel. So he clearly thinks it's worth doing. And it's awful. It gets no views. I'm going to look it up again. It's really bad. But he's not the only one. They're all as bad. Well, not all of them. Ironically, Reform UK, particularly because they've got GB News as their own private social media company. So they're using social media well, which again should warn. See, it's really hard to even. You've got to go down to even find it, and it's pants. Like, his last video was a day ago. It ain't even got 1,000 views. He's the Prime Minister. How does the Prime Minister put a video out that's so bad it doesn't even get 1,000 views? This is awful. Anyway, but it's the same with all of them. Like, there are sometimes, I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to point fingers, but sometimes I come across like people who've worked at Downstreet. So these are like advisors. I've seen communications people who've worked for various governments in number 10 at the top level of government, and they do a YouTube channel and he has no views. Rubbish. And it can only be because they're not learning how YouTube works. They're not actually understanding the environment. They don't know how to build a platform on YouTube. And they're not asking any. I would give them that advice for free. But anyway, finish me rant. It's like, but it honestly, because it upsets me. It used to upset me because Labour were missing the opportunity for an advantage, right? To get a message directly to people past the mainstream media, because they can get a message to more people than the mainstream media. I can't. I don't do that. I'm not saying I haven't got the skill to do that, but they have got the ability to do that. They're a huge political party. They're like pretty much the largest political party in Europe, really, aren't they, by membership? Certainly in the country. And they're currently in government. I mean, It should be like shooting ducks in a barrel to get views because people want to know what they're up to. And this is pants. But because they haven't got anyone who knows how to do it. But the thing is, it's now worse than that because Reform UK are using it. They're using social media. How are they on YouTube actually? Because GB, the thing is, like, whatever Reform UK have on YouTube, remember they've got GB News, which is basically the broadcast wing of Reform UK anyway. There is a Reform TV, and okay, they're not doing brilliantly, but they're getting way more views. Oh, do you know what? I'm going to have a look at this. Hold on. They're getting way more. They are actually getting views. Yeah. I just want to have a quick look at something. I want to see how many proper views they're getting. Just looking them up on Social Blade. So it's not, although they maybe have only just started. Hold on, how long have they been going? 3 years. But they're still doing better than the other channel. Like, if you look at the views, like 2 days ago, one that got 9,000 views. But it's better than Labour get, or the Conservatives. There's one 2 months ago, 158,000 views. I mean, you know, they're not putting out regular content either, so they're not using it properly. But then if I look up Nigel Farage, he's got a YouTube channel, I think, hasn't he? Let's have a look here. So he's getting views. Again, he's not putting out regular content. He could use it better, but he is getting, look, 3 days ago, 34,000 views. 10 days ago, 79,000 views. 2 weeks ago, 30,000 views. A month ago, 505,000 views. There are no videos here that are trash. All of them are getting good views. They're not putting out loads, but all of them are getting good views. So it's not that Labour are missing an opportunity to get an advantage here. Reform UK are well ahead of the game. They're well ahead of the game here. I might do a video just on this. Ivan, they're saying YouTube's a hard platform, getting nowhere on my channel, yet have success on other platforms. My difficulty with YouTube channel affects my self-esteem. Please help me. Well, so what? I mean, I'm not an expert on other platforms, right? I've never even tried to build on other platforms. I suppose one reason would be is YouTube. You can turn YouTube much more easily into a full-time career because it's easier to monetize. Whereas, you know, Twitter, Facebook, yeah, you can monetize. It's tricky. You're effectively, with Twitter and Facebook and similar platforms, I don't know about TikTok at all, by the way. You're effectively trying to get people, you're trying to get a small number of like super fans to donate money so you can get people to sign up. Like on Twitter, you can do a thing where you can join now, can't you? Which is like sign up for memberships and you can get like private tweets and stuff. I think, does Facebook have something similar? Other than that, you're just asking people to donate. Whereas with YouTube, people consume your content. They don't have to donate anything. And they're still contributing a lot of money to you because it's the advertising revenue. Whereas Facebook and Twitter and things like that, you're just sort of scrolling through things. So you don't necessarily get to see so many ads. It's like shorts. In fact, let me just tell you at the moment, and at the moment, December's absolutely awful, but you get multiple pounds on average, per thousand. Well, once you've built up a channel a bit, you know, I get multiple pounds per thousand views usually. This December's really crap, by the way, which is why I think the December trade figures are going to be awful. But I'm still getting over £2 a thousand views. Whereas on shorts, you get about 12, 13p per thousand views. Because, of course, people aren't going to see adverts as much on a short. So, yeah, so if there is competition, if it's harder on YouTube, that is it. But the other thing with YouTube is there is I mean, people have to be more involved. People can just scroll through a thing on Twitter and they can just, that's funny, I like that. Or just like a comment, I'll subscribe to you. Done. Whereas on YouTube, you have to click on the thumbnail You're not going to subscribe to someone. You're not going to scroll down something and go, oh, I like that, I'm going to click on it. You can, because YouTube have that, but mostly it's the videos. So you need people to first, the YouTube are going to show you a thumbnail. You've got to click on the thumbnail. Then you've got to listen to them for a bit before you'll even think about subscribing to them. So it's much more involved. You have to provide much greater value on YouTube to get a subscription or a view. But at the same time, it is also marketing. You know, there are techniques, but I'm not going to go over now, but there are ways to do it. But anyway, there it is. We have run out of time. But, you know, what I would advise, I mean, at some point I have been thinking about, I might do like a YouTube guide channel, but there are ones already out there. There are ones already out there. There are decent ones already out there. vidIQ is pretty decent. YouTube itself, there's a YouTube creators thing that has advice, and that's YouTube. They're not selling you wrong. They're not sending you down the garden path. So what I did when I was first building up a YouTube channel, which wasn't this one, I spent a lot of time. It was almost a second hobby, or third hobby, I suppose, really. Just watching video after video of advice. And most of the videos you'll watch, you'll think, I don't know how to apply that to my channel. But if you keep watching them, every now and then, someone will say something that you think, oh, I can apply that, and you try it out. So just do that. Just watch lots and lots of guides, because it's a skill. And you have to learn it. But anyway, there we go. This is the last one before Christmas, but I'll just go over, for those who are still sticking around, what is going on. So Monday, we're going to do another little half-hour live stream at 4 p.m, as I was for the past few days. Tuesday's Christmas Eve, so there will be a live stream on that Monday, at 4 p.m. again. It might be a bit longer, and also that will be just for subscribers in general. I'll open it up. That's more of a public one. Then there will be a stream on New Year's Eve. I still haven't completely settled on the time, but I'll probably just do 7 p.m. again, as usual, so don't confuse people. That will also be open up to subscribers as well, just as a New Year's Eve special. And after the New Year, we'll just be back to normal. Although, who knows what normal will be then, but we will see. But thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a good Christmas if I don't see you before then. And until next time, I'll see you later.